All right. Today we're going to be talking about authentication inside of Django. In Django, first of all, we're going to talk about the different types of authentication. We're going to have a conversation over basic, session, and token authentication, what the differences are between each one of them. We'll then talk about the Django abstract user model and why we'll be utilizing the abstract user model instead of the already built-in user model inside of Django. We'll talk about Django REST Framework's token authentication and how that works. And then we'll go into building some user views with their permission classes. Finally, at the end of our lecture, we'll go ahead and cover how to handle the super user because we will no longer have access to creating super users through the terminal once we create our own user. All right. Does anyone have any questions over the topics that we'll be covering today? Perfect. If there aren't any questions, then let's dive into the very first portion here. So basic authentication. Now, in these three different types of authentications for authenticating yourself with an API, the way I like to think about it is we have our very least preferred method. Then we have a way where things are not necessarily in a stateless function. And then we have a stateless way to make sure that we can interact with our API. Now, stateless, what does that mean? Well, let's start covering this authentication, then we'll go into stateless once we start talking about session versus token. So basic authentication basically means that whenever we are sending any form of API request, we are including all of our credentials inside of our request at the same time. Now, what is a problem with doing authentication in this way?
Security concerns.
Yeah, so there's securities. The very first thing that pops up, right? As soon as every single time there's an HTTP request being sent, I am exposing my user's credentials or anybody who wants to interact with this API. Now, this is an API that's just not necessarily for super secure purposes, and it's more for fun so that other people can interact with it. And there's really no importance behind what data is being saved or what the interaction is with this API. There's a couple of them that you can find on GitHub as far as free APIs that you can interact with just to practice your HTTP requests. Well, that's a good way to have basic authentication. It saves a headache for the developers, and it's also nice for people who are barely starting to learn how to send HTTP requests with credentials. They're sending this request in a very straightforward manner. They understand where to integrate their credentials, and that's just basic authentication. Now, it is not preferred, and we do not recommend it at all for your APIs as you move forward. Now we have session-based authentication. Session-based authentication basically means that every time the user or the client that is sending the request starts a conversation with the server, that conversation continues moving and it never gets closed. It's never, hey, this is what I need. The server responds and the conversation ends. Instead, it's, hey, this is what I need. The server responds, and at the end of its response, it says, well, what else do you need? Or what more can I do for you? And that connection stays living between both of them. Now, the problem with that is that if one of them closes unexpectedly, it can cause some unexpected behavior in either the client side or the server side. And that's just session-based authentication, right? Now, we have something called token-based authentication. And whenever you're sending a token, well, that token essentially takes care of making sure that one, your user credentials are not being exposed every single time. And two, it's also ending the conversation upon the end of each request. As soon as that request is being answered, the server stops communicating with that client and the client stops communicating with the server. That way, they can each work independently without being reliant on one another. Now, this is called stateless because there's no reliance between one and the other. While the other one is session, a session is continued and there is a continuous communication between the client and the server until the session ends. Those are the three types of authentication. Does anyone have any questions regarding these three types?
So
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Tim. I'm sorry.
you said that tokens obfuscate the credential information.
Yes, so we're instead of actually sending credentials, the user will send the credentials one time, receive a token in exchange, and then that token will be what matches up to the user.
Okay.
All right, Morty.
Oh yes, I just want to find, does Django generate the token, or is it something we actually have to design or whatever?
You could definitely create this functionality on your own and start it from scratch. And the way we're going to learn it today, Django itself will not be creating the token. Django REST frameworks will be what will generate the token,
Oh, okay, thanks.
of course. Any other questions?
So I'm guessing we'll just be mainly learning about the token one because that's what we'll be likely using for our API and all that.
Yes, that's correct. Today we'll only be talking about token authentication. If we want to learn about the other two types of authentication, we could definitely create an optional lecture that we can deliver during our personal project time. We'll just leave it up to a class vote. I'll send a message on Slack, and if anybody's interested, we can build something for those two as well.
Would you say a good use for a session authentication would be more like something that you have open consistently, like a game that you're playing online? Because the server and the client have to communicate consistently to update XY coordinates and Z and 3D, stuff like that.
Right. So something that requires WebSockets and channels, which is
Yeah.
what you're referencing to,
Hmm.
continuous live updates, that would be best for session-based authentication.
Okay.
All right. Okay, perfect. It doesn't seem like there are any other questions. So let's go ahead and start talking about our abstract user model. Now, our abstract user model, we're going to go ahead and build it from Django. So here we can see that I have my nice handy dandy project. Everything's running. I can go over to this URL, get my hello Zulu, and explore my different API endpoints. But I don't necessarily need to go through that process as of right now. So now that I have my server running and everything is working, I got my confirmation that everything is good. I can go ahead and create an app for my user. We're going to go ahead and keep this Pokemon themed. So we're going to make it a trainer app. I'm going to run my command, Python, manage py, start app, and name it trainer app. All right. My trainer app has now been created. And inside of this trainer app, I'm going to go ahead and jump into the model section. Now, instead of utilizing the models that comes in from DjangoDB, I'm actually going to go into the specific place where the user information is being stored inside of Django and grabbed the abstract user class. So I'm going to go ahead and say from Django.core.auth.models. Interesting. I want to import the abstract user. Let me go ahead and fix my Python environment here. This currently VS Code is not able to understand where this is coming from. Oh, that's it's not in there. It is in here. The auth models import abstract user. There you go. Well, let's take a look at this. One, we can find this information inside of the Django documentation. There's no magic behind this. Currently, I'm grabbing this exact import from our curriculum. But if you take a look at the Django documentation, take a look at the user model, it will tell you specifically where the user model is being stored. So here we're within the contrib portion of Django, inside of the authentication portion, and we're going to go ahead and take a look at the models inside of Django. Now, this is all already written by somebody else. Here's all the models that were created in Django. So we can take a look at the auth base user. Now, a base user can either be an abstract base user or a base user manager. Let's take a look at both of those. So an abstract base user it's a simple class which has a model, right? This model is a password, last login. Some information has already been included in there. There's an attribute for whether it is active or not. And then there's this required fields portion, which we'll talk about here shortly. There's a couple of other methods that have already been created. For example, how to save the user. There's a password validation portion that's in there as well. So we can take a look at the password validation if we really wanted to. I'm not going to dive that deep into how this is working. Then we have a getter for getting the username. We have a clean method that has been set. There's a lot of OOP that has been done for us already when it comes to the user model. So that's great. Now let's go ahead and take a look at this base user or this abstract user. Gonna go ahead and Command F this and take a look at abstract user. All right, so my abstract user is already inheriting from the abstract base user, which I just demonstrated. And then we have this permissions mixin. Well, what is this permissions mixin that we're also inheriting from? This permissions mixin has a super user capability, so we can actually, it also has the attributes for super users. And then it has this thing called groups. Now, what could groups be useful for?
So like
Many
groups
users at
of,
the same. Sorry, Chase, go ahead.
oh, yeah, I was gonna say like users that are like related somehow, not like physically or anything, but like that have similar stuff.
Yeah. So, for example, if we're working within, let's say, the corporation here in Code Platoon, right? And we have a student portal. Well, there's instructors, there's other administrative people that work within Code Platoon, there's students. Now, we can't just separate all of these by super users because in reality, the only ones that should be super users are direct developers that are interacting with this site. And just because an instructor is teaching at Code Platoon doesn't necessarily mean that they would be one of the developers that interacts with the site. So instead, we have groups. And groups is where we would set our different users, where we would have a group for students, a group for administration, and a group for instructors, each one of them having their own sets of permissions. And here we have all of the permissions that are coming in from each individual user. Now, this is a many-to-many field, and we can take a look at permissions, but we're just not going to dive into this portion of user authentication today. All of it is within the Django documentation. And if somebody is interested, please let us know. We'll be glad to send the information regarding permissions. But permissions is a monster that I would strongly recommend to save in the back of your mind for now, and then utilize it later on once you feel more confident with Django. All right, let's go ahead and backtrack here. We're back to our abstract user. Oh, where did you go? There you are. We're back to our abstract user. We know the different attributes that we're inheriting from abstract base user and the different attributes that we're inheriting from permissions mixin. Let's see what else the abstract base user has here. Well, now we have a username validation. We have a username that we can utilize. There's first name, last name, email, is staff, is active, and now if we take a look at the required fields, well, in the required fields, now there's an email being listed in here. So we're saying that whenever somebody signs up for this site, an email has to be provided in order for a user to be created. That's what's coming out of the pocket directly from this abstract user model. Now, there's all of these methods that are also there available for us that I strongly recommend you take a look at. I've seen it plenty of times where someone actually goes and recreates these methods that have already been, they're there. They're there for us to utilize, and there is no need for us to remake them. I've also seen it where people go and they recreate these fields, first name, last name, or they attempt to recreate other fields and have different functionality when Django has already done the majority of the heavy lifting for you. So you don't necessarily need to do any more adding into what this model does. Now, there is also a user. If we scroll lower here, here's the user that Django actually utilizes. Notice that the user just inherits from the abstract user. All right. I did a deep dive into what this abstract user is. I just want to make sure that everybody understands that there's not a magic going on in there. Before I backtrack and actually start utilizing this class, does anyone have any questions over the abstract user breakdown?
Real quick, how did you get into this file again? Did you just right click and like go to definition? I mean, to get into like all these different class files. I mean, from where you started from models.py after you imported
Yes.
everything.
You could do that.
Okay.
You could right click and then go to
Okay.
definition. I usually just hold down command and then click on whatever it is that I'm looking for. And that will open it up as well. All right. It doesn't seem like there are any questions. So let's start making our own user now. Here, we're going to go ahead and create a class of trainer. And for this trainer, I want to inherit from the abstract user. Now, as we said before, all the information is already created. I have a ridiculous amount of fields and attributes. The only thing that I want to change is I want to change my username field to instead be username. I wanted to utilize the email as the username. And I want my required fields, instead of requiring there to be an email, I want it to be empty. Now, there may be a question here. Why would I want my required fields to be empty if I'm asking the username field to be email? Well, the username already has a built-in validator that says you cannot create you can't create a user unless the username field is being provided. So if I place this email inside of required fields, they're going to clash against each other and throw an error. Let's do it for now so that we can see said error. Actually, I'm just going to comment it out. Yeah, let's do this. So that we can see said error, and then afterwards we'll remove it. So I'll say Python. Oh, actually, I messed up. I got to go to my settings and add my app. Skipped a very important step here. All right. Settings, added my app. We're good to go now. Let's go ahead and make migrations. So Python, manage py, make migrations. All right, so there's my error here. And I'm getting a system check, identified some issues, reverse access, group users, set auth, trainer app, trainer groups, add or change related name, argument to definition. All right, so we get a couple of different errors here. And if I remove this email class or this email field from the required fields, it should take care of the majority of these errors. So now I go to make migrations. It looks like I still have an issue. Now the issue that I'm getting is regarding to the email field. And that's because inside of the abstract user, the email field already has a different value. So I'm going to go ahead and rewrite the email field. I'm going to say, hey, we're going to utilize a email, which will be models dot email field. I want this to have a verbose name if I really wanted to. In this case, I don't. I'm just going to have it set to a max length of 255. And I'm going to go ahead and pass in a unique is true. Because if I'm utilizing it as an email field, well, let me go ahead and comment that out first. Let's make migrations. And I'm getting a error still. Add or change related name argument to definition of trainer. So let's go ahead and add this unique is equal to true. And now let's make migrations. And I keep getting these errors. And actually these errors are different. Oh, I see. These errors are coming in from my database and the fact that I already have a user model. Interesting. So let me finish tying the knot here, and then we'll go ahead and come back. So the reason why I'm getting these errors is because we already created a couple of super users inside of Django, and Django is already tracking a separate user model. So now that's a simple fix. When you start an application, you want to start it by creating your user model. Now, this is why. Now, since I already have a user and I made migrations and Django's already running under the hood a different set of users, when I was confused, I'm telling it to utilize a different user, but it's saying, hey, we can't I am not allowed to have multiple user models working at the same time. So you need to tell me which one of these I'm going to reference to. And that's why we're getting all these clashes with the reverse accessor with auth.user.groups. All right. It's saying essentially two users exist. We have a trainer that exists and we have a user that exists. So how do we fix that? Well, there's a couple of steps. Step one, in settings.py, we're going to go ahead and add, hey, there's going to be an auth user model. And this auth user model is going to live inside of trainer app.trainer. Inside of the trainer app, there is a model named trainer. Awesome. So that tells it where to find it. But telling Django where to find this user model, is that going to fix this clashing?
Yes.
Okay. Why do you say yes?
I'm just guessing, actually.
Oh, got it.
I don't think it's going to because you said that Django can only have like one user model working at a time.
Awesome, right. It can only have one user model working at a time. And as of right now, my database already has migrations for a different user model, right? So instead, what I need to do is I'm going to have to drop my database and I'm going to have to recreate my database. Now, in doing so, that's going to allow me to make a fresh set of migrations. And you'll see that a new migration was created for my trainer. Finally, successfully, we have that migration for the trainer.
What do you do if there's like users that you don't want to lose by dropping the database?
You can drop them into a JSON file utilizing the dump data command that we learned, I think that was in like day two, I'm gonna say. It was either day two or day one. Save them in that JSON file and then load them back into the database once you're ready.
Okay, makes sense. Thanks.
Of course.
So essentially kind of like with fixtures in a way, like a
Yeah.
fixtures. Okay.
All right. Awesome. So there we have our trainer. He has been created. All we changed was a little bit of the information regarding the email. We now have a username field where the email will be required. And then we have no required fields other than email and password because those are default. So email and password are default. So we don't need to add them in here. All right, so now we made our migration. Let's go ahead and migrate. The reason why I want to migrate is because now in Pokédex, we can take a look at everything that's inside of this user model. So inside of this user model, we have an ID, a password, we have a last login, which is extremely useful. That way we know when our users last logged in. Why would that be something that's important to us, or what could we utilize that for?
Um, like if somebody hasn't been online for 10 years, you could have like a say like, oh, if you have logged in for 10 years, delete your account.
Perfect. Yeah, so we could have a timer for deleting accounts. We could have a timer for deleting tokens for authentication purposes, right? If we don't log into for example, if I don't log into GitHub for a week or two, by the time I log in, it tells me that I've been logged out. I need to get a brand new token. we have the variable of whether this individual is a super user or not. Username, first name, last name, is staff, is active, they joined, and email. So all of that is already included within my user model.
How's that affected when you go to serialize the model?
Ah, interesting. Can you help me out understand what you mean by that?
Well, you have all these fields in the database, but
Mhm.
if you build a serializer, do you have to account for those, or are they automatically accounted for?
Got it. Yes, these fields will be automatically accounted for within your serializer, right?
Do you have
Because
to, yeah, when you build a serializer, do you have to inherit something or import something in order for that functionality to auto handle those fields, or does it happen by itself somehow?
got it. So the serializer isn't a communication between yeah, let me see. The serializer isn't a communication between, so here we have serializer, models, and database, right? The serializer does not exchange back and forth between models. The serializer actually exchanges back and forth within the database. So even though we're referencing the trainer app, it's not looking at the trainer within the model. It's looking at what the trainer representation is within the database.
So when you build a serializer and you reference the model, it's not referencing the models.py, it's referencing the model representation in the database.
Correct.
Interesting. Okay, thank you.
Of course. All right. So now we have this information. Our trainer has been built, and we can go ahead and start actually creating new trainers. Well, how do I go about doing that? Let's go ahead and create a trainer or have a way to create a trainer. Well, if I'm starting off from scratch as to what I know here, I know that there are views that I can create and that I can plug them in through my URLs. So here in URLs, I'm just going to simply come down to where my URL patterns are located. It seems like we have a little bit of depth space there. I'm going to create a new path. So here I'm going to have a path of API slash v1 slash users. And this is going to include the URLs within the trainer app. So I'm going to say trainer app.urls. Now I can go ahead and go into my trainer app and create a new file named urls.py. Now in this urls.py, URLs, import path. Perfect. I'm going to go ahead and create a new set of URL patterns with a path of, let's just do sign up. Now here, or we could even do something like register. Let's do register. That sounds a little bit better. And here I want to have a view. Now my view is going to be my registration view. I know this is going to be a class, so I can just utilize the as_view attribute from there. I'm going to import this from my views file. All right. Now I've pushed on quite a bit. Before I continue pushing forward, I'm going to go ahead and take a pause here before we move into creating views. Does anyone have any questions over how we created the model itself, or how this URL patterns are connecting over to the views file?
So if you had made that addition to settings.py, if the auth user model equals trainer app.trainer, your migration would not have worked, correct?
That's correct, because instead, by default, what Django has into this, oh, hello, as a value is it has contrib dot auth dot trainer, or excuse me, that's its default value. Right, so we want to change that value in settings.py to be the trainer that we have provided. right, I don't see any other questions, so I'm going to go ahead and push forward here. We already connected our URLs. Now let's go into our view for actually registering a new user. So here I'm going to go ahead and make my class registration. And let me go ahead and go into all of my imports from REST framework, which hopefully I remember most of them. From REST framework dot view. So I want to import API view. Response. All of my different HTTP status. And I believe that should be good for now. If I run into anything else, I will address it then.
Don't you need to import the like individual HTTP statuses too, or is that in line 4?
You can do it all individually. If I just utilize as S, that gives me the ability to do the following. I could do s.http and then go 404. And then that way I don't have to have a bunch of imports. I could just reference them from the parent package.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Let's create this API view here. Now, what this API view is going to eventually return will be a response, which I believe oh, excuse me. I need a post method here, which is going to take in a request. And here I'm going to return a response that will have user created. Let's take it step by step here. First, I'm going to need credentials. So I'm just going to go ahead and print request.data. Let me go ahead and exit here and run my server. API v1 users include trainer on, blah, blah, blah. That requires a view. Okay. I did that wrong inside of my project URLs. Syntax error. Here you are. Include and all right, there we go. I'm able to receive a request. Great. Now let's go into slash users, or excuse me, slash API slash v1 users registration. Okay, I'm getting an error there regarding a space, it looks like. So let me go ahead and take a look at my other URLs file. And I'm not seeing, oh, register. There you go. All right, so for my registration, currently I'm getting a method not allowed. That's because I sent a GET request. And it's telling me that the options are to send a post request. Here's my content type, etc., etc. I am sending application JSON, and this is what I want to send. Oh, all right. I want to send a username, or excuse me, I just want to send an email. And let's do fr@fr.com. And I would also like to send a password, which in this case, I'm just going to keep it nice and simple and do fr. Now let's send this post request. Post takes one positional argument, but two were given. Interesting.
Don't you need to put self because it's a class?
Yeah, I kept thinking the same stuff.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Let's go ahead and try that one more time. I should probably copy that. Here, I'm going to do it here. All right, so we send our post requests. Currently we got a bad request. Detail JSON parser expecting property name enclosed in double quotes. Of course. Why not? All right, it was invalid JSON. Now I was actually able to accept the request and we get the response of user created. And we can see that when I print request.data, I am getting my email and password. All right, great. I'm going to take a copy of that. I'm going to say data is equal to request.data. So that's going to give me a copy of that dictionary. Now I have the data that I need to be able to create a user. But when I take a look at my model, I actually need 3 fields to be able to create a user. What are those 3 fields?
Username, password, email.
Perfect. So we have username, password, and email. As of now, I am only receiving email and password. Now, this is a dictionary. How could I add a username field here?
Just do data bracket username equals, and then whatever you want it to equal.
So we'll say data.get, and here we'll grab the email. All right, well, now let's print data. Send our request one more time, and now we have all 3 of our fields to be able to generate a user. Great. Well, let's go into the process of creating a user now. So I'm going to say from models.
Why did we use get email in the username?
I may be misunderstanding your question, but I'm
So you're
just
essentially making the username also the email.
Oh, okay.
What's happening?
all right. Let me fully understand the question, Jason. I appreciate the support, but I need to make sure that I'm addressing the students' questions.
Yeah, that's essentially it.
All right. So now we have the email here. It's being set to the data. And now I lost my train of thought. There you go. Import the trainer. So now we have the trainer and we're able to create a new trainer. So let's go ahead and quickly add a trainer and deconstruct the data. Let's say new trainer. And then for now, we'll just print new trainer. We're not saving this trainer. We're not building a serializer as of now. We likely won't go into building a serializer today. But this is our trainer as of right now. Now let's go ahead and send this data one more time. So now when we send the information and we print our new trainer, we're getting the dunder method, which is only returning the username of fr@fr.com. Let me go ahead and enter my Pokédex to make sure that it didn't save, because in the case that it did save, we're going to have to remove it. All right, awesome. So it didn't save. Great. So now I have the ability to actually create a new trainer. Does anyone have any questions over how we created a trainer here? All right, since there aren't any questions, currently we're able to create a trainer, but we're learning token-based authentication. So at the same time we are generating a new trainer or a new user is being created, we should also generate a token for said user and return that in our response. So let's go into the process of including token-based authentication. I went ahead and shared this link to the token-based authentication inside of REST framework inside of the Zulu questions. It goes in detail over how to generate a token. Here we have an example of where to utilize that token and where that token class is actually coming from. And it goes step by step over how to actually add our token-based authentication. So first one, REST framework. We need to make sure that gets added inside of our Pokédex project. So in our installed apps, currently we have REST framework, but we don't have REST framework auth token. So we need to add that. Go ahead and say REST framework dot auth. That's going to add our new no module name REST framework dot auth token. Got it. I'm gonna go ahead and kill that for now. So now we have our REST framework auth token that has been added into this information or into our installed apps. That gives us access to the app because REST framework is a Django project that has multiple apps. In this case, we are stealing from the Django project of REST framework a new application or an app within it named auth token so that we can utilize it. Now, this part's a little bit buried inside of the Django documentation, so we have it included inside of our curriculum. But we actually need to tell REST framework how we are planning to implement authentication. So we do that by adding default authentication classes. Which takes in a list. And in here, we could just add REST framework dot authentication dot token authentication. And this is essentially telling REST framework, hey, moving forward, when we need to actually authenticate a user, we are going to do so with token authentication. So two changes to settings.py. One, we added this REST framework dictionary that tells REST framework how to authenticate users. And we also added a new app of REST framework.auth token to installed apps. Now that we added this app, well, this app is what gives us access to the token model. I now have a new model inside of my project. So in order for this model to be implemented inside of my database, what would be the next thing that I have to do?
Would you have to import it into your file?
Okay, let's go.
Into your admin.
I could add it to my admin as well to keep track of it, but let's go ahead and do this portion here. So let's say from REST framework dot auth token dot models import token. Okay, so that gives me access to the class. But even though that gives me access to the code in my class, is that going to give me access to the data? Is this already existing inside of my database? Let's take a look. I'm going to go ahead and run \d here. And as of right now, I'm seeing a bunch of things from Django, my move app, my trainer app, but I never saw anything regarding a token.
So make a token app.
Okay, I could make a token app, but that is already created for me here. So the model already exists. What is it that creates the model inside of my database? Well, there's the make migrations portion, right? So Python manage py, make migrations. That's going to say no changes detected. And now I'm going to go ahead and migrate. Now this is saying no changes detected because the token model already exists inside of this app. And this app already has a migrations folder with no changes inside of it. So now when I migrate, you'll notice that there's now 4 different migrations that have been made into my database. And now if I run a \d command, here we have my auth token, which is where my token is going to live. So if I say select all from auth token, you can see that there is a key that gets created, the date that it was created, and which user it is going to belong to. Those are the three attributes that we get from that class. Speaking of, let's take a look at this class. Oh, go ahead, Chase.
So that just creates like the table. That doesn't like link a token to a user, right?
Right. That just created the table inside of our database. We'll go over how to link the token to the user here shortly. All right, so here's our models. Our model is saying, hey, there's going to be a key that gets created, and there's a method that it utilizes for creating this key. Now in this user class, we see that it has a one-to-one field, and that one-to-one field is what connects it to the user model. And I believe this is the question that you had, Chase. Notice it goes into settings and finds auth underscore user model. Well, if I take a look at my settings and I scroll all the way to my bottom, here we see auth user model, and that's what connects it to my trainer. This is a one-to-one field. One user can only have one key, and one key can only belong to one user. And its date created is a datetime field. Here you can see the generate key. If you want to take a look at how this is actually working, you can. It's good. It's a lot of stuff that just happens under the hood here. But it's going to always generate a unique random key for each user. All right. Does anyone have any questions regarding the token model or how we got access to that token model from Django REST framework?
So the token is not auto-generated here. The times on the time date time field, it said it was going to, as soon as it was generated, it was going to spit that date time into that field. But that's not the same as when we. Okay, never mind. I don't have a question.
Okay, awesome. Any other questions? All right. Now we have our token. Let's go ahead and implement this information. I've created a trainer. This new trainer, I'm going to go ahead and actually save it now. So I'm going to say new trainer dot full clean. Then I'm going to new trainer dot save. And at this point, I should probably add a try and catch block. So I'm going to go ahead and say try. And then accept, exception as E, return, response. All right. So now I'm able to create a new trainer. I'm then checking that that trainer has all of the properties that it needs to have, and I'm saving said trainer inside of my database. Now, typically this process gets handled by my serializer. Again, we're not going over the serializer today since we already covered that information. We are concentrating on creating the trainer. Now that I have a trainer, I can print that new trainer and say, hey, the new trainer was successful. But now I want to actually generate a token. So I'm going to say token. And this token is going to be equal to token dot create or dot objects dot create. And what I'm going to pass into this token is going to be the user of my new trainer.
You want to create the token after you save the trainer?
Yes,
Oh, because otherwise it won't have anywhere to put it.
right. We want to make sure that there's an actual ID. So once you run this save, this is what generates an ID within the database. And that's what it needs to build the one-to-one connection. All right. Well, now let's go ahead and print the token. Now, a little bit of a difference in syntax here. Notice that here, I just call the class and I destructured the method. When I utilize token.objects.create, this is going to automatically save it inside of my database. So I don't have to go through the full clean and save method. This is going to generate a token in my database and save it. Perfect. Let's go ahead and send our request one more time. I'm gonna copy this, paste it, and post. And I am not running my server. All right, so I'm getting a user created. Here's my print statement for my user. That's FRFR. And here is the token that I have created. Great. So in my response, now instead of just sending back user created, I can send back something a little bit more sophisticated. I can say, hey, the user is the new trainer dot username, or I can say dot email since they're the same value. And then I can say the key here, or your token, is the token that I have just generated. Now, if I send that request again, it's going to fail because a user already exists. Let's go ahead and take a look at what that error looks like. I send my request here, and here I'm getting an error. I'm getting username, a user with this username already exists, and I'm getting an email with this, a user with this email already exists. Okay, perfect. So instead, I'm going to go ahead and send different credentials here, just so we can see the final project. And let's just do AV there. I can get really creative sometimes. Object token is not JSON serializable. All right. So now I'm getting this token is not JSON serializable. But when I ran print token, I was able to see a token being printed into my screen. So what's going on there? Can anybody tell me what happened? Well, if we take a look at the token class, when I go to print token, what it's going to do is it's going to return the dunder method, right? And that dunder method is just returning self.key. So that's the reason why I was able to see it. But if I try to just call the token class, well, that's not something that's JSON serializable or something that could be sent over the web. So instead, I need to make sure that I specify token.key. Now let's go ahead and send this one more time. Back here. And let's send the request. And now finally I get my user of ADAD and my token being accessible. So there is my response. I'm going to go ahead and copy said response. And I'm going to bring it down here. All right, so now we have an API that we can sign up for using an API endpoint and get our credentials for our username and a token to be able to authenticate with this class. Does anyone have any questions over the registration view?
For creating other different kinds of users, is it always necessary to have to implement the token logic? Or if you had, I know we're doing it this way, but I guess with other classes that we're trying to create or borrow from, do you always have to go through the process of creating the token and
If you
implement that logic?
Yeah, if you're doing token-based authentication, this is going to be the way to do it. Even if you're utilizing something like JWT tokens, you'll have to find a way to, one, create the user and then tie the token in. If you're doing something that's session-based authentication, you don't have to worry about anything regarding a token. Pretty much your authentication for creating a user stops here. Does that answer your question, Jason?
Yes.
All
To
right.
to kind of get to Jason's question, would you would you create a class that just generates the token and then inherit from that class to add the other user information?
You can, if you want to tie it in, you could add some manual stuff where at the same time you create a user, you can overwrite this dot save method here and go into your models. Oh, that's the wrong model. You can go into your model and potentially say, hey, whenever I do this dot save or the save, whenever I send this method here, not only do I want you to save the information, but I also want you to generate a token. So new token be equal to token dot objects dot create, and then passing with the user is equal to self. And maybe you have like an attribute up here. This is definitely entertaining a hypothetical, so I apologize if I'm losing anybody in the class. Uh, and then here you can say self.token is equal to new token dot key.
Is the token reliant on the data specific to the user, to the trader in this case? Or can you create just a generic user with the same username, the same the same everything, create a token, inherit that class, and then change the user information later so you don't have to repeat yourself later?
That's correct. So they're completely separate from one another. The token is not dependent on the user data,
Awesome. Thank you.
of course. All right.
Quick question too. Are you able to like using the put method, are you able to change tokens or is that just like not common practice?
Using the put method, like update the token so that you have a different one. You can. I wouldn't put it within the put method of the user. I would make a specific endpoint for token reset, just to separate those. Usually the put method for the user is to like update my name. Maybe I want to update my password. Is stuff like that would fall under the put method for the user itself. If you want something for the token, I would just add um, a different endpoint that would do that specific functionality.
Okay, thank
Of course. Any other questions? Okay, perfect. Since there aren't any questions, currently we've gone on for an hour. So let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break and then we'll come back to continue on with our lecture. Thank you so much, everyone. And I'll see everyone back shortly. Welcome back, everyone. Now that we've taken a look at our views here, we're able to generate a new user. Let's go ahead and go through the process of logging in a user. All right, so let's say we want to log in a user. What would that look like? Here I'm going to go ahead and make a separate API view. I'm just going to name it login. It is going to take an API view, and it is going to receive a separate post request. Now, a lot of this is going to look pretty similar. We're going to go ahead and grab our data and copy it. That part's not necessarily going to change here. So we grab our data, we copy it, we make sure we add the email there. But now we're going to actually try to generate a new user or try to confirm that our user actually exists. Well, how do we do that? Well, I could run a query, something like, hey, I want to grab trainer.objects.get. And actually, I just realized I made a big mistake up here. I apologize. We'll go over that here shortly. All right. Dot get, where username is equal to data dot get email or username. I could do something like this, but this doesn't necessarily authenticate my user or confirm the password or do much for me as far as making sure that the user is actually being authenticated. I need a tool that will make sure that there is a matching user for both username and password. Well, that tool is actually named Authenticate. and it comes in from Django. So I'm going to go ahead and go into Django. And I'm going to import authenticate. So in django.contrib.auth, there is a method or a function, I apologize, named authenticate. How does this function work? If I hover over it, it's going to tell me, hey, all I'm looking for here is going to be credentials. What do those credentials look like? Well, if I go into breaking this down, I'm going to say, hey, there is going to be a trainer. My trainer will be the result of where the username is equal to data.get username, and my password is equal to data.get password.
Do we have a password? Right. I thought we had a token. So.
Well, we're logging in, right? So
Oh, okay.
and we're attempting to get our token here, right? Okay, so now let's go ahead and return a response here. We're just going to say success for now, and we'll update this as we move forward. We'll say if there is a trainer, then I'm going to print trainer. Otherwise, I'll say no trainer matching credentials. Well, let's go into plug in this view into our URLs here. I'm going to say path. This is going to go into the login view. And I'm just going to bring in my login view. There, I'm naming it as login as view. And let's go into that endpoint. So we go into login. Here's my application JSON. Let's send a user that we know exists. Let's send FR. Well, when I send this request, I'm getting success. But if I take a look at my terminal here, I'm getting no trainer matching credentials. Interesting. Well, let's send it with AD. Again, I get success, but I'm still getting no trainer matching credentials. Well, let's see what's going on here. Let's print my data attribute so that we can ensure that we actually have the information that we need. Oh. All right, so we know we have the correct information, and we know this user definitely exists here. All right, so if I run select all from trainer, we can see that we have FR and there's AD. So AD definitely exists. Well, then what's the issue? Why am I running into an error? Because everything has been created. Well, the error that I'm running into is actually happening because of the way I created my users. And I very much apologize for this mistake here. Now, instead of utilizing this .save or this .full clean, when it comes to users, there's a specific method that we have to utilize. And this method is .objects.create user. Now, this create user is going to actually tie a user into our data. So let's take a couple of steps back here. I'm going to open up a separate tab. I'm going to run this one to register. All right, so there's my registration view. Now, inside of my registration view, I'm going to run ZH as my new user here. I'm going to register him. So ZH was successful. I was able to create a user, and there we have our token. Everything's working great. Well, what's the difference? So I'm going to go ahead and select all from my trainer application. And I'm going to go ahead and limit to 2. And I believe I could add, yes. Oh, am I that rusty? Let's try that. Yep, I am that rusty. Well, let's take a look at what we have here. We have our ID, and then the next portion is the password. Well, here's my ID, 1. My password is FR. This is for fr@fr.com. Then we have 2, AV, which is for avav.com. 3, AD for adad.com. But notice that when I changed from just the regular way in Django to a creator user, well, now my password is being hashed when it's being entered into my database. It's not doing a one entry as if it were just a regular character field. It's actually hashing it and entering it into the database. Well, now that we have ZH, let's see what happens when we go into the login view and try to find ZH. Well, now when I go into the login view and try to find ZH, instead of getting no user found, I am getting the actual user attribute for username of zh@zh.com. All right, so quick recap. We updated our registration to utilize the create user field. That is what allows it to hash inside of my user database. And from there, we utilize the authenticate method from django.contrib.auth to be able to grab a user that matches both the username and password from our database. All right. Does anyone have any questions over how we were able to authenticate a user?
When you refactored the method to create the user, using the create user, as you were typing, there was also create super user. Would you want to put an argument in your registration to determine what kind of user you're creating, or would you recommend doing that separately?
I would recommend doing that separately, having a complete separate endpoint for that, and that endpoint would preferably be hidden so that it's not exposed to anybody, since you only want people who are actually developers or who really need that power to be a super user to have access to said endpoint. Of
Thank you.
course. All right. Well, let's finish out our view here. We're able to create a trainer, but now this trainer also needs to have their token when they receive a response. Well, how do I grab my token? Can anybody give me a hint as to how I would go about getting this token from the database?
Would you have to do like a .get method?
Yeah, so I could say something like user token is equal to token dot objects dot get, or I could say where the user is equal to the trainer. And let's go ahead and print that user token now. Let's go ahead and send that request. And that worked. We actually have a user token. But now we're logging in. Currently, we're utilizing a get evaluation. This is assuming that there's already a token existing for this user. But if the user logs out and we delete their token and they try to log in, this is going to raise an error. So what else? What other method could we utilize to compensate for that?
Would you wrap it in a try except block
Okay, I
to
could wrap
to,
it in. Go
to
ahead.
see if token.objects.get user equals trainer exists, and if not, create it or go through a different process?
Yeah, that's essentially what we want, right? We want to make sure that we attempt to grab it. And if we can't grab it, then we want to create something. Well, Django knows that that is going to be a common issue or a common functionality that we want. So instead, it gives us this get or create function, which is going to look for a trainer that matches this user ID, this one-to-one connection. And if it doesn't exist, it's going to create one and place it inside of our database. Well, now let's go ahead and send ZH for ZH. See what user token is being printed. Interesting. So what is the value of user token as of right now? Right? What is the name of this data structure?
The tuple.
Yeah, we have a tuple. So we could deconstruct said tuple to find out if it was created and where the token is being stored. So now if I send that request one more time, we are actually holding the token value or the class, while created would evaluate to false when the request comes through. Well, now I can return two different types of responses. I can say, hey, I can return a response where no trainer was found, or I can return a response that very much looks like the one above. And I will no longer need this. Instead, I'm going to return a trainer, and I am going to return a user underscore token dot key. So now when I send my request one more time, oh, that is not the one I meant to use. Here you go. We can see my response comes back, and there is my user and token for a user that is able to log in. Now, if a user logs in from multiple different platforms, they'll have the same token, and they won't run into an issue of creating multiple tokens because we're utilizing the get or create method. All right. Does anyone have any questions regarding the login method?
Line 44, line 43, you say user equals trainer after get a create. Is that just automatically looking at like the IDs, or is it like the because isn't user in the token table like just a like primary key?
Yes, so that's correct. And yes, that's essentially what it does. It breaks it down to where it knows it's looking for the ID itself. So its translation is where user is equal to trainer dot ID.
Okay, thanks.
All right, any other questions? Okay, perfect. Doesn't seem like there are any other questions. So let's go into a little bit of the fun stuff here. Well, not necessarily too much fun, right? But let's take a look at our date joined. So we have a date joined here. And let me go ahead and select all from trainer app, limit. All right. So here's our information. We have our user ID, the password, but this last login, notice it's empty. The user never logged in. We have the is super users if they're false, if there is staffed, and then we have is active, which is currently set to true. All right. Well, I have a last login portion where the user was never logged in. How do I fix that? Well, I can actually utilize login there. And I can take a look. The login is just going to take in an HTTP request. And then it also says, well, you can also provide a user here. So let's go ahead and try to do this portion here. I'm going to go ahead and say login and pass in the request. Let's see what happens when I send ZH. Well, currently I'm getting a error. It's saying, hey, we received a request, but I'm also missing one positional argument. Okay, awesome. So now I know that the next argument here is going to be the trainer. And I should probably do this after the if statement. All right, we send our request one more time. This time it was successful. Well, what's the difference in P-SQL? Let's select all from trainer, where username is equal to zh@zh.com. All right, so there's our information. But now notice that for our login portion, we actually have an entry of April 1st at 8:23 a.m. And that's what allows my user to actually log in. So this login function is super important to utilize. Typically, what I do when I'm making an application, if somebody's registering and I'm returning a token, I also log them in here.
I guess I'm confused. Like, what time zone are you going off of when you say 8:13 for the login?
So this is currently using the time zone from the client that made the request, and it's also utilizing the time zone that is being specified here. So UTC is the time zone that my application is using.
Time.
All right, Chase?
When a user logs in, does it automatically set their status to like active or true?
Yes, when the user logs in, it's also going to set their is active status to true. Once we log them out, that will change to false. Okay, awesome. Let's go ahead and move on to our information view. Because right now we have all this token authentication stuff, but we haven't actually utilized the token, right? The whole point is to restrict specific endpoints. Well, if I wanted to grab information regarding a view here, well, what would I need? Well, inside API view, there is a couple of attributes that we can interact with. So for example, there's authentication classes and permission classes that we can interact with. So we're going to set values to those attributes now. I have authentication classes, which is going to take in a list, and I have permission classes, which is also going to take in a list. Now, both of these are going to require either token authentication or is authenticated. So I'm going to go ahead and go into from REST framework dot authentication, import token authentication, and then from REST framework dot permissions, import is authenticated. Because those are the two types of authentications that I want to allow for this API view. Well, I'm going to add it. The authentication classes will be token authentication. And I want to make sure that there is actually an authentication that happens. So this can only be accessed if the authentication is successful and if a token is provided. All right, so the permission class will look at is authenticated. This will say, well, what's the form of authentication? I'll take a look at the authentication classes, find token authentication, and then here, if you hover over it, it even tells you, hey, this is the specific thing that we're going to be looking for inside of the headers. We need to make sure there is a token with 401F inside of the authorization header. All right, awesome. So let me go ahead and copy that there because that is important information that I need to grab here. So inside of the authorization header, there should be a token with a space followed by the token key. All right, which we are providing to every user. Well, now let's take a look at this. This one is only going to be a GET request. It's going to require self and request. And for now, let's just return a response of success, which will change here shortly. Okay, well, let's see what we can grab from this information. Gonna tie it into my URLs now. can add a path of info and utilize my info view. My server is running. Let's open up a separate tab here. And let me see, when I logged in, here is my token, which I'm going to grab here. And let's go over to my info view. All right, so when I send my request to the info view, it gives me a 401 unauthorized. Well, this is the first time I get this response. This 401 unauthorized is happening because it checks if there's a token in the request. And because there wasn't a token in the request, it threw an error. And here's the detail saying authentication credentials were not provided. Well, let's see. Interesting. We might have to open up Thunder Client to be able to send this request. Or I could utilize curl. I do not want to waste people's time, so let me go ahead and open up Thunder Client. With that said, give me 5 minutes to get that up and running and ensure it's working correctly. Currently, it is 10:29. Let's come back at 10:35 and continue with our lecture. Thank you so much, everyone. All right, now that we got Postman opened up, here's my login portion. I'm still sending a JSON body here of email ZH with password ZH. If I send this request, you'll see everything comes back here correctly. And actually, before I keep moving forward with Postman, is everybody here accustomed to this platform? Has anybody not seen this? I'm not tracking if this was covered yesterday.
It was talked about very briefly, but no, I have basically no idea how to use Postman.
Perfect.
Yeah, this looks like something very new.
Adam used Thunder Client, but like it doesn't work anymore for WSL, so we had to use Postman.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, let's go ahead and cover Postman real quick. If you go ahead and, oof. All right. If you go ahead and go to Postman, here there's going to be a download Postman link.
You're not sharing whatever screen you're talking about?
I'm tracking, yes.
Okay.
Let me go ahead and pull that up here. All right, so Postman, what is it used for? Postman's essentially, everybody can see this Chrome browser with Postman displayed on it, right?
Yes.
Perfect. All right, so Postman, what is it used for? It's essentially utilized to be able to send requests, test API endpoints. There's a couple of other things that you can do with it as far as setting up automated tasks to ensure that your API is working correctly so that information is being tracked. If there's specific listeners or other things that you need to set up, you could even put up an entire separate server inside of Postman. Now, what we're going to be utilizing it for is going to be to test our own API, making sure that our API is working correctly. And it really gives you a lot of dynamic information that we can interact with. We can either place keys, we can mess around with the headers, with the authentication values. We can add parameters in different ways. We can have it inside of a raw JSON body. We can, as it displays here, we'll take a look at it more once I open up the portal. But if you go to Postman, it's going to actually realize what it is. So don't freak out if you're on Windows and you see this. This is also available for you in Windows and you can install it. Once you have it installed, you can just go ahead and run Postman inside of your machine. It's not too much of a setup process. It's just going to ask for an email and a password. And once you have that done, you'll be good to go for setting up requests. That's all when it comes to that tool. Nothing too crazy with it, but ensure that you download it. Do not use the one on your browser. If you utilize the one on your browser, it doesn't have access to your local host. So you need to actually install the application inside of your machine so you can send requests to your local host.
You're saying don't use the one in VS Code or
On the browser. You
okay.
can utilize the one that's on VS Code, but don't use the one on the browser. This
Okay.
does have a way to do it so that you can send requests browser via browser. You want it to be installed and running inside of your machine. All right.
Do you mind if I add something real quick that I noticed? Because I was playing with Postman on the weekend, and I felt like I was kind of just playing around with like the authorizations, and going into Chat GPT, like to get authorizations to work, I had to like add a collection, because otherwise, if I didn't add a collection and then work off the collection that I added, it wasn't letting me do like anything involving, if I had created a user, and had authentications.
Interesting. Yeah, I think I would have to take a look at that to fully understand. I believe
Yeah,
this is the
yeah,
collection.
so the collections on the left tab, it made me add one. At least ChatGPT talked me into how to add one so I could use like authorization tokens.
Yeah, so when you log in, it should take you straight to your home. From there, you can go into workspaces and go into my workspace, and you'll see that it populates here a couple of different settings. What you'll get is just the overview portion. Now, once you're inside of the overview portion, all you need to do is click the plus sign. Once you click the plus sign, you're going to get this untitled request portal. All right. In that untitled request portal, here in the search bar is as simple as saying, hey, where is it that I want to search? So if we want to go to something that we are familiar with, we can always bring back our Poke API. Why not? All right, so here I'm sending a GET request to my Poke API. When I send my request, I'm going to get back all of my information regarding my Pokemon. Notice that in my response, I currently have the body, which is what I want to see. It is printed pretty. I could also go into raw, and that just gives me raw JSON. Could take a look at it in preview mode as well, or I can visualize. Visualize response with post spot. Not gonna do that. All right. So there's our three different types of responses, right? We can take a look at the different ways. It also gives me a status code here. It's telling me, hey, my response came back with a 200 OK. It's giving me the time that it took for my request to be completed, and it breaks down the request time. So this is how long the DNS lookup was, which is just finding the actual server that it was trying to speak to. The TCP handshake, where we talked about, hey, this is me. Can we speak? Yes, we can speak. All right, what do you want? This is what I want. Okay, wait, let me grab the data. Grabs the data, server grabs the data from the database, returns the data, and this is how long it took to download and present the data for us. So the total process was 278 milliseconds, where the longest time was taken in the DNS lookup. All right, just information that you may want to look at if you're trying to make your API as efficient as possible. And it even gives me the size. Well, why is it breaking down to this much? Well, before, if I just take a look at the response.headers, it would just give me that the size is so many bytes. But here it tells me specifically, hey, the body took this many kilobytes and the headers are taking this many kilobytes. And that's important for me to know as a developer because if I'm working on an API that needs to be super efficient, I want to make sure that these response size are light so that my time for this transfer start is a lot smaller in comparison if my size was a greater amount of information. And if we interact with something like the Rick and Morty API, and I go into characters, so let me go ahead and do this number here. Oh, and what I do here? Oh, I changed my layout. That is okay. And now I send my request. Well, notice that this is a much lighter, or I think it's actually heavier. It's a heavier request. And here, if we take a look at the body, well, now my body was the heaviest portion, while my headers was a very small amount of information. All right. So there's a Postman in summary. We can also add different methods such as post, delete, and get. We have all of our CRUD application. And here inside a body, when you want to send something through the body, You can say, hey, I want to input my data raw, and instead of text, I want it to be set to JSON. This way I can actually write JSON information. You also have access to the headers, which we'll talk about here shortly. All right, let's go ahead and get rid of that and come back to our login information. So currently I'm going to log in. Here's my JSON data that I'm sending within the body of my request. And I'm sending a post method. Well, when I send this request, oh, excuse me, there's my body. When I send this request, this is the return value that I was able to receive. All right. Does anyone have any questions regarding Postman before I continue?
Can you go over the auth tab right next to headers?
Yes, I will. Oh, the auth tab here. I usually don't use this auth tab. Um, I can definitely cover that later on after the class is completed on a separate portion, but this part is not part of our class for today. All right. Any other questions?
Does it do pagination?
It actually does. Yes. What do you mean by does it do pagination?
Like, I did a query for the Pokemon API, all Pokemon, and it only returned the first 20, I believe. Yeah. I don't know how to send the next request using pagination.
Got it. So as far as it being smart to have like automated information like that, it doesn't know how to do that. You would have to read the API documentation to be
Okay.
able to actually implement that information.
Okay.
All right. Awesome. Okay. Well, now let's continue on with where we left off. So currently I have this information and I see that I need a header for authorization, which is going to have token and then my token key. Well, in my response, I have my token. So I'm going to copy that. And I'm going to come over here and go into my info view. Currently, if I send a GET request to my info view, it's returning, hey, there's nothing here. There's no information. We can't interact with you because you didn't give us your API token. And here I can see that I'm getting my 401 unauthorized. So my server is responding correctly, just like I told it to. Well, how do I fix this? I need to prove that I am who I am, that I have the ability to interact with this API endpoint. Well, I need to go into my headers, and inside of my headers, I need to add a key named authorization. And inside of this key, I'm going to follow exactly what the Django documentation tells me to do. I need to provide token followed by my actual token key. Right, so there is a space between those two. So there's my token followed by my token key. Well, now what happens when I send my request? Now when I send my request, I get back success. Well, how is that happening? Let's take a look at token authentication here. Well, token authentication, what it does is it grabs the model here and it authenticates. First, it checks if the length after being split is actually of 2. If it's equal to 1, it's saying that the credentials are invalid. If it's greater than 2, it's also telling me that I am not including the word token in my string, making a strong assumption there. All right. Then it grabs my actual token and it decodes it. After it decodes it, it returns the credentials there, where it passes it into the model, and that's what returns my actual user. So this token authentication class is going into the HTTP headers when it receives the request, finding that line for authorization, and then analyzing the token that I pass to make sure that it's actually the correct token.
Yeah, so ChatGPT was having me do that through essentially adding a collection and using the authorization tab, but I didn't know in headers you could just add it manually.
Awesome. All right. Well, what else just happened? Let's take a look at the request now. I'm going to go ahead and print request dot user because now that my request, since I'm providing a token, I am now have access to the user inside of this token. I can grab all of the attributes of said user. I can say, hey, I want to see the email. And if I send my request, it's going to show me just said email. Currently I don't have anything else. Let's see. I believe it is named login. Let me see here. Last login. There you go. I can take a look at the last login, and that is also going to get printed in my terminal. All right, so now I don't have to do a whole, hey, well, I want to get the trainer dot objects dot get where token is equal to token, right? Because that's the only thing I have. I just have the token. Well, now instead of doing that, this authentication class or this token authentication sets the user matching the token. And actually, that's the user matching the token as the value of user within the request, which means request.user returns user matching provided token. All right. So now if I just want to return info of this user, well, I myself can say what that info is. I can say, hey, I want you to return such a thing as username. And that could be user dot, or excuse me, request dot user dot username. I can also ask it to return first name. And that could also be request dot user dot first name. Now let's send our request one more time. We can see that first name is empty. The attributes still exist, even though I never provided one. It still exists within my database. I know that because we utilize inheritance. It's just blank inside of my database. So there I can grab different attributes. I can build a serializer, and I can just return the serialized data for my user. All right, and there is my get method. Does everyone understand, or does anyone have any questions regarding authentication classes, permission classes, and how to utilize Postman to add the authentication header and send this request?
Yeah, I got a question. So in your GET request, you manually input the token. Are we going to learn how to like, are you going to show us how to do that automatically so we don't have to like manually input a token?
You mean once we build our full stack application?
Yeah, like you went into the headers and you put the key of authentication and then token, and then you just copy and paste a token. Are we going to learn how are we going to learn to do that automatically? So when a user just clicks login, it automatically does that for us.
Yes, we're going to be covering how to do that once we go into a full stack application. I believe that's tomorrow, actually. Oh, no, not tomorrow. The day after. Yes, it is tomorrow, actually, full stack.
Okay, awesome. Thanks.
All right. Any other questions?
Is there a reason that the order is that way? It seems like we're going to need to do this, and manually inputting it seems very clunky.
Well, currently we're utilizing it as if it were just an API, right? And just like when we interacted with the Noun API, when you created a user, we didn't create the user through an API endpoint, right? But we did create it through a portal on their site. And then afterwards, they provided keys. And every time we sent a request, we are manually placing the request inside of our code. So we're just building that same behavior. We're going to go into how it would work automatically once we have our full stack lifecycle tomorrow. But this is how essentially it breaks down and it works. Does that answer your question, Tim? And I apologize if it didn't.
No, not really.
Okay.
I presume I haven't looked at the assignments for today, but I'm presuming we're gonna have to use Postman or Thunder, whatever it was, in order to do these.
Hmm.
And it seems really odd that it's gonna want you to actually go in and modify the header manually instead of including it in the code when you register a user or when you log in. It's fine. It is the way it is.
Got it. Yeah, I may have to pull aside this question later because I don't think I'm fully understanding it. I apologize. All right. Well, does anyone else have any other questions before I move forward to our logout method?
Thanks for the Postman walkthrough.
Of course, no problem.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, let's go into our logout method. So now we're able to log in. We're able to have all of this information. Well, now what if the user wants to log out? We're going to go ahead and go into class, log out. This class is going to be an API view. Again, I only want authenticated users to have access to this class. So I'm going to go ahead and add authentication classes is equal to token authentication. I'm going to say permission classes is equal to is authenticated. All right. Now this is going to take in a post request.
So, sorry, real quick to interrupt you, but so you're kind of repeating your logic for the authentication classes and permission classes. Would be better to kind of abstract that to a different method, and then loading it into info and log out as opposed to repeating the logic.
Yes, you definitely can. Now that you asked the question, let's go ahead and refactor this a little bit. So I can do something like, hey, this is going to be a user view. And every user view is going to be an API view that has authentication classes set to token authentication. And I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste this here. All right, so there's our token authentication. And now instead of utilizing the API view, what I can do is I can utilize a user view. So now I'm utilizing inheritance to set the attributes of authentication classes and permission classes for both info and logout. Did that answer your question, Jason? All right. Awesome. Now let's go ahead and return to this logout. All right. So for this logout here, I'm going to go ahead and grab the user, and I want to grab that token and delete said token. Well, how do I have access to this token? Let's take a look at the token class one more time. And in the token class, I see that I have a related name field of auth token. Well, this means in my models, there is a field named auth token. Oh, hello. Too much. There you go. Auth token that will return the token that has a one-to-one connection. All right. Well, let's implement this information now. I want to delete the token of the user. And I also want to log them out. So I'm going to scroll up here, and I'm going to bring in one more method named logout. And for this logout method, all I need is the request. And that's it. Well, now I'm going to go ahead and say, well, it's already going to authenticate my user. So I'm going to say user is equal to request dot user. So I have access to it. Token is equal to request dot user dot auth token. Because if we take a look at the trainer one more time here, we know that there is a related name field of auth token. Let's print both of those. And return a response. I'm going to go into my URLs, bring in my view of logout, and add my path. All right. So there are my views now connected. Going to come here and add logout. Now remember, in my body, or in my headers, I apologize, I already have, oh, not in my headers. What is going on here? There you are. So this is my response here, but in the headers of my request, I already have my token. So that's what's allowing me to send this request here. Now, when I send this, this returns an error because I'm sending a GET request. What I'm asking for is a POST method. So I'm going to go ahead and change this from GET to POST, and now send my request. I get success. There's my response. So now I'm going to take a look at my server. And my server, when I print the user, I'm getting that user object. And when I print the token, I can see the token key being displayed. All right, perfect. So now there's two things that we want to do when a user logs out. I want to make sure that I delete their token. And I want to make sure that the user is logged out. Now, it's as simple as saying log out, passing the user that is going to log out the user from the application and remove the user from request. And as far as the token goes, well, we're just going to do token dot delete. All right. Let's go ahead and send this request now. And let's take a look at our tokens here. Actually, this will work. I'm going to go ahead and send my request. Okay, I get an internal server error. Let's take a look at what happened here. So trainer object has no session. Okay, well, what happened here? Inline. Got it. So what's happening here is I'm trying to delete a token, but that token has not been working or is not working because I had logged out the user. So let me go ahead and fix this. I'm going to go ahead and log in my user one more time. I log him in. I believe this is still the same token, but just in case, I'm going to copy it. So my user has been logged in. I'm going to go to my logout function. Go to this token portion. I'm going to paste the token. Perfect. The token has now been pasted. Now I'm going to go ahead and send my request. I'm still getting the same error here. So let me take a look here. Trainer object has no attribute session. This is happening from this logout function. Oh, I passed in the user instead of request. That was a pretty embarrassing mistake. Let me go ahead and send this logout function one more time. Now we have an invalid token. No problem. Let me go ahead and log myself in. Send my request to log in. I get a brand new token. I can go over to my headers now, update my token, and I can send my request to delete the token, and I get back success, where my token is deleted and my user is now officially logged out. All right. Does anyone have any questions regarding the logout method?
So the token deletion has to come after logout, not before.
You could do it either way. I do it after the logout to ensure that my user is actually logged out before I delete their token. Otherwise, I'm deleting their token without officially logging them out of my application.
Okay.
You do that in case like maybe the logout internet connection gets whatever, it's interrupted, doesn't successfully complete, then you've deleted the token for no reason.
Exactly. All right. Any other questions? Okay. If there aren't any questions, the last portion that we're going to be covering here is going to be our HTTP statuses, or actually we have the master user as well. But let's cover HTTP statuses here. So here in my response for my registration, I want to make sure that this is obvious. This is going to create. So I'm going to return a 201 created. All right, for my login process, this one we could just keep it at 200. We could do a whole if to check the token if it was created or not. But you want to make sure that you mainstream this information as far as the login process go. So I'm going to keep it at 200. I don't want the front end team or for other people whenever they're interacting with my API to expect too many different types of responses. It makes it a hassle for people to work with your API. You just want to keep things as simple as possible. So in this case, they're not creating a new user. What's being created is a token. It's not something necessarily that they need to know. So we're just going to return this 200 OK. All right, for a user being able to check their info, this is also going to be a 200 OK. And then finally for a delete, instead of returning anything as far as success or anything else goes, I'm just going to go ahead and return a status of 404 no content. Or excuse me, it's not 404. Where's no content? Where did you go?
204.
204, thank you. All right. Awesome. So there is all of our users. They are now being we now have a fully capable API to handle basic users. But the last portion that we're going to go ahead and cover is going to be a super user. Well, for a super user, we're going to do something very similar, almost exactly the same as our login process. So later on, you could definitely refactor this to have it be a conditional statement so that you can manage the login process. But we're going to call this, let's go super login. Or excuse me, not login, registration process. What am I doing here? Let me fix that here. All right, so here we have the super registration. Now this is going to take in the data, going to take in email, and here I myself am going to say data is super user because I believe that's what it needs inside of SQL. Let me check here. Oh, there it is. It is super user. And I'm going to myself set it to true. And then the only thing I'm changing here when I'm creating the new trainer is instead of create user, I am creating super user. All right. And actually, I don't even need this portion here. I can just do create super user, and that will do it for me. Now, earlier, somebody mentioned, hey, well, how do we handle this endpoint? Or why is it that we're handling this completely different? Well, we can just say super endpoint, add this as an environment variable. And let's do super slash. And now when we go into our views, or excuse me, into our URLs, I can import OS. I can also say super registration. I can come down, go into my path. Here I can say os dot environ dot get. And let me see what I named it here. Oh, that should not have a space. There, there. And I can add my super registration as view. All right, so this will allow me to create a super user now. If I go into Python, and go ahead and Control C. Interesting. Wasn't running. There you go. So that's going to grab my endpoint, going to utilize the super user as view. Now let's make sure this works. Let's bring back Postman here. And let's sign up a user. I know this is going to need super.
Can you quick like recap like what went wrong when you were trying to debug that? I just wasn't following.
Are we talking about this portion here?
Yeah, when you're trying to debug how that wasn't working at first and then you fixed it.
Absolutely. So this is specifically looking for a string pattern. So because this will be interpreted into a string, that's great. But Django is very strict in the fact that as it's being entered, it has to be a string pattern. So all I did was I wrapped it inside of an F string so that after it's done reevaluating, it still gives me this super inside of it. That's all it was. All right. So then we have our super user. I'm going to be sending my request here. But I want to make sure that I have something in my body. I'm going to make sure that my body carries raw and JSON data. So here, I'm going to go ahead and add an email. And for my email, I'm going to make it something a little bit more unique. Let's do francisco@fr.com. And for my password, oh, yep, that will do it. Email francisco@fr.com. And then let's add a password of FR and keep that there. All right, so there's my super user that's about to be created. My server is running. I click on send, and currently I'm getting an error. Let's see what's going on here. So user/super, I'm getting a 404 not found. Interesting. Let's go into our browser here really quick and see what's happening. So currently I'm getting this none. So there's my error that's coming in.
Do you have to migrate it?
Migrate what? I'm sorry.
Um, Wait, never mind. You didn't change the models. Never mind.
All right. Likely what needs to happen is I need to load my .env environment. So I'm going to say from .env import load.env. Let's make sure that that's what's actually causing the problem here. Go into my .env file. I'm going to copy it one more time. Make sure that that's correct here within my views. And let me send my request one more time. There you go. So now it's working. So now let's send this post request through Postman. Great. So there's my user that was created. I now have a user with a token, but this is a super user. So my super user can now go into uh, my admin portal. All right, so currently it's telling me, hey, you are authenticated as ZH, but you are not authorized to access this page. Would you like to log in a different account? I would, actually. And the account that I would like to log in will be Francisco at fr.com and fr. And now I have access to my Django administrative portal. And the reason why I have access is because Francisco is actually a super user. That is all we had to change there. All right. Does anyone have any questions over how to handle super users?
So just creating the registration is the only difference. The super registration.
Yes. And again, the only actual difference within the view is changing it from create user to create super user. Everything else within the view is still working exactly the same. As far as the difference within the URL patterns, make sure that you are hiding that URL path because you do not want that exposed to anybody.
How do you hide it?
I placed it within my .env environment here. So now it's an environment variable. This file here is not going to get pushed into GitHub and nobody
No,
can have
I,
access.
I get that. But when was it displayed in the list of endpoints when you were coming out as none for your endpoint?
Oh, yes, but that's because I'm in debug equals true.
Oh,
If my
okay.
code was false, it would never show that page.
Okay, fair enough.
All right. Any other questions?
Is there a way to refactor the super user registration to inherit something to make it less code? Because it seems like you're violating a lot of the do not repeat yourself.
I agree, and there definitely is. I'm gonna keep it this way for now. But yes, there's definitely got to be a way. You could probably create a method that can take a look at where the endpoint is coming from. Like you could take up the request dot, I believe it's location that comes in the request, and then go off by the end of the string saying, hey, if this came from this endpoint, then we're just creating a user. If it came from this endpoint, we're creating a super user. And that would be the way to handle that.
All right.
All right. Any other questions? All right. It doesn't seem like there are any other questions. That is all the content that we have for today, everyone. Today was a shorter class. So just to do a quick recap over everything that we did, let me bring up our README here. We spoke about the different types of authentication, basic, session, and token, focusing on token for our stateless API. We then covered the abstract user model, and we also took a look at the what it inherits, such as the base user and permissions mixin, what went into both of those classes and those attributes that were automatically set into them. We then created our own model where we grabbed the abstract user and inherited from it and created our own fields that we wanted to add onto it. After that, we covered Django REST framework authentication. In Django REST Framework Authentication, we learned that in settings.py, we needed to add the auth token app, and that we also needed to add a dictionary for REST framework, letting you know what default authentication classes we'll be utilizing. We then went into the user views and permissions. Inside of views, we created a registration view that would also tie into a token after creating a user. Ensure that when you are generating users, you utilize this create user method. Otherwise, you'll run into unexpected behavior and unsafe behavior as far as hashing passwords. All right, that then connected to the user, which connected to the token, and it also logs in our user. We went into the login view where we utilize the authenticate method. The authenticate method will find a one-for-one match that has both the username that we provide and the password that we provide. Now, remember, the password is hashed in the database. So you can't just run a get query to try to match the passwords. You have to utilize this authenticate method. We log in our user, and we also covered this get or create functionality. We then moved into our info class, where we actually set authentication classes and permission classes. In the authentication class for token authentication, we can see that inside of our headers, we need to add an authorization header with the correct token and key value. We utilize inheritance to use that inside of the user view. Here inside of Postman, we can take it the login function, or excuse me, let's take a look at the logout function. And in the logout function, we can see how we added this authorization header and the token that was provided. Token, space, then the value. That space is very important. And then we finally ended our lecture, or excuse me, we then went into our logout function where we logged out our user, ensured that that user was logged out before we deleted their token. And then finally, we went into the super registration method for registering a super user and hiding that URL pattern within a .env variable so it's not exposed. At this point, does anyone have any questions over any of the material that was covered today?
Is there anything else that the create super user does differently than just say is super user to true?
Yes. So when you run the create super user, I wonder if it will show us here in the database. But there's a lot of permissions mixin. When you set it to true inside of the database, the value changes to true. But the permissions mixin that lives inside of Django doesn't change. Now, when you use create super user, when that user is created, all of the permission mixin that is already set for super users are added to that user instance while it's being generated. It's not just as simple as changing this T for the super user function. It actually changes the permissions that are attached to the class as far as inheritance go in the background. Does that answer your question, Tim?
It does, yeah.
Awesome. Any other questions?
The admin portal that Django uses, what authentication method does it use? Does it just use the session?
Yes, it utilizes session-based authentication,
All right, thank you.
of course. Any other questions? Okay, it doesn't look like we have any other questions. So let's go ahead and stop the recording here.